ESD also did a survey of some of their districts, and these quotes they collected for me, so I wanted to thank them for that. I think this quote was interesting because it was a different take. It suggests that after full implementation of the 24 credit requirements, there may be fewer students who are credit deficient. So these are some options that allow flexibility in earning credit for students and flexibility for districts. Competency-based crediting, there is a code in transcripts that will allow districts to record in transcripts students that have competency-based assessments. In 2014, there were 8,763 students that earned credit through competency-based assessments. Those are primarily probably world language credits. Also, there are districts that award credit for meeting standard on the state assessments. We talked about equivalency crediting this morning. The districts have a lot of flexibility in how they define credit. So a similar process to equivalency crediting could happen with courses other than CTE. So you could have, say, a big history class, for example, that would meet both a social studies graduation requirement and a science graduation requirement. So you could do equivalency crediting between things other than CTE and core credits. For CTE, there are rules and guidance on how to transcribe and track those. There really isn't for 2-for-1 accrediting. So I think districts are a little bit at a loss of how exactly to implement that, but there is some interest in looking at that. This was a quote that seemed to capture some of the concerns about how to handle competency-based crediting. It also talks to districts being very interested in the high school and beyond plan and identifying exactly what needs to happen for the high school and beyond plan to really support these graduation requirements. I want to close with some speculation on how graduation requirements might initially impact students statewide. I know Ben shared this graph with you by email a couple weeks ago. The red trend shows the percent of recent graduates who enrolled in community and technical colleges and took pre-college level math. This is data from the ERDC. This is a trend that we as a state want to see go down, and in fact, it did go down slightly, I think, but significantly in 2013, the most recent year for which we have data available. Now, the 2 points above the red line are the percent of students who accumulated 3 or more credits of math by the time they completed 12th grade. This data has the same data limitations that I mentioned earlier for the 10th graders. So it probably is somewhat noisy data. But between 2012 and 2013, there was a graduation requirement increase of an additional math credit, which is probably reflected in this change from 67% to 71%. Now, just because I plotted them on the same graph doesn't mean that they're causally related, but it is suggestive. If you think about the kind of students that would be the first students impacted by an increase in graduation requirements in math, it isn't the students who plan on attending university initially. They already are taking the math that they need to go to a university. The students for which this change would be successfully implemented are students that probably only want to take the minimum number of math courses. They may not be students who are particularly successful in math. They may be B students or C students or D students. And, but they can pass a math course. Probably the students who are struggling in math would also be, certainly struggling in math. Despite the graduation requirement change, if they weren't able to make it with 2 credits, they're still gonna be not making it with 3, and they need extra support under this regime. But those students who are able to take math courses and formerly would have only taken 2, in 2013, they took 3. And a student who took 2 years of math and graduated in 2012 and went to a community college almost certainly would not have placed into college level math. A student who took 3 years of math would have had a much better chance of placing into college level math, and I think this data does reflect that. I would speculate that the initial changes we can expect to see as a result of graduation requirements will likely be incremental changes that hopefully build on one another. Next year, I hope we continue to see an upward trend in the number of students taking more math. In 2016, when 4 years of English will be required for all students, I hope to see a similar pattern of students taking more English, and hopefully a corresponding downtick in the number of students requiring remedial reading and writing in college. So I think this is a hopeful thing. I think that that graduation requirements can make a difference. I don't think, when we look at required action schools, we can see really substantial change in a short period of time. But when you look at it statewide, I think that we will probably see incremental changes, not dramatic changes. But before the system can prepare all students for college, career, and life, we have to prepare more students. So, thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I'll start taking questions now. Oh, sorry, Cindy.
Did anybody talk about what courses are no longer offered in high schools because the requirement is for specific categories to meet the 24 credits?
Nobody talked about that. No.
Okay.
I have heard districts talk about that in relationship to the assessment requirement, but not in relationship to the 24 credit graduation requirement.
We heard a lot about that early on in the 24 credit discussion, that a lot of electives were, if you only have 24 slots and they all now have to count in a category, then some of the electives, students who want to take 3 years of music, for example, those, you've already used up your fine arts credit requirement. And so now how do you fit that into the schedule? And I still hear that in the field, but I think now that 24 credits is the requirement, what we're seeing is that's either becoming what's called a 0-hour class, so it's additional, or it's starting to fade away. And I think that would be important and certainly, to me, enlightening information to know what isn't being offered anymore at high schools to meet the 24 credits.
Deborah?
But part of what we did before we passed the new framework is we added 6 credits for personal pathways. So I think some of the classes that students would want to be able to take, they could take it within those credits. So that's where it began and where it ended. I think it's fairly a lot of difference in terms of the options that students have to put together kind of their areas of interest within that framework.
And hopefully that is the case, but I'd just like us to, if there's a way to find out that, for example, with retrieval or whatever, things are dropping off the menu.
So we now have more than a quarter of our school districts who have opted 2-year waiver. And it's a pretty significant number. And in my limited contact with the districts, I think they're thinking about it, they're struggling with how to do it. Some are already doing it. But I'm wondering if there's an opportunity here for the state board to somehow partnering with WASDA to clarify, first of all, the options that are there, and also some of the ways that districts are doing this. I'm thinking of the WASDA meeting in November, because they're gonna, that's really, this coming school year is when they're gonna be crystallizing their views. And I think there's not complete understanding about how all this works, and especially smaller districts maybe don't have access to all the information. I mean, some of this information will be helpful in terms of available options. So it's just a thought. It's still a work in progress for many districts, and there's some districts who've already figured it out. And so you could have some examples, for example, of how they've done that. But that's an opportunity where you get a lot of individual board members there to really be cross-fertilize and be brought up to speed about what the options are.
Connie?
This is the first time I'd heard that the flexible block schedule actually results in higher student achievement. The 4x4 is not as effective as a 7-period day, which everybody wants a 7-period day if they can afford it. But the flexible block schedule is also apparently very effective. So that's something that we could share. If there are districts that are using that effectively, that would be helpful.
Other comments or questions for Linda?
I would add in response to Connie that one of the districts I talked to has a trimester schedule that was quite interesting and very effective for them.
Janice?
I think the other comment I'd have is that credit retrieval is not very satisfying for students and their advocates by and large. There's tremendous variation at the building level, let alone the district level. And PassBack is sort of an example of a tool that we used with students in foster care very successfully for a number of years, and now there's not a single Seattle high school that will accept one. So then we turned to OSPI's list of authorized online providers. Many high schools have made differentiated decisions about those as well. So students have a great deal of difficulty initiating the correction path, and that's part of why they end up with 0 to 1 credits in 10th grade. And so I do think there's an opportunity in the future for us to talk more expansively about policy around credit retrieval that is just more forgiving and kind to students who have stumbled, particularly early in high school, because the data is so clear that those 9th grade failures are very likely to lead to a school dropout.
To build on that too, I think the thing that has always struck me about the credit retrieval process, and it was noted in your report here, was that not all options are available to students depending on their ability to actually pay to do the option, right? So if I can afford to have my student do an online course or do a summer, then that they have more options versus a student who may not, who has to do that work over the school year because it just is not feasible for them. So they're just figuring out this opportunity gap. Here's another opportunity gap here around credit retrieval. Any other comments?
I was gonna say, just along those lines, I think, with 24 credits required, there's literally less time in the student's schedule to do credit retrieval during the day. And you think about the population of students, especially in rural districts, right, that maybe would be engaged in credit retrieval, and, they're less likely to do summer school because they don't have the money to pay for it because they are required to work during the summer, or big in a lot of districts is because they don't have transportation to get there. Their parents work, and they can't even start credit retrieval till they have a driver's license if they even then have a car, because nobody can get them there. So in the past, we've done credit retrieval as part of the school day, and now there's literally not time in the student's schedule to do that because they just have to
issue about looking at the data and seeing how, of course, how, the credit requirement may have impacted course offerings, I think was one, or may not have, we don't have the data at this point to know. And then making sure we're sharing opportunities with districts who are, between districts who are implementing the 24 credit requirement and those who are still struggling to try to figure that out. Is there some sharing that we can do about strategies? And then this correction, this last piece that we talked about, thinking about for those students who do need credit retrieval at some point in their time in high school, what are the options and how do we make that process, one, a little